Hello, everybody. We still have a few people logging in, so we're gonna give everyone a few seconds to get settled, and then we'll get underway. Okay, I think we should be ready to go. Hello, everybody. My name is Jo. We have over 300 guests from over 41 countries joining us today for our in-session talk, Redesigning Work. Before I introduce you to our esteemed guest speakers, Jeremy and Linda, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording after the event. We also invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button. We want to make this in-session very, very interactive, and we'll introduce polls during the talk, and you will be able to submit your answers online. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jeremy Myerson and Linda Gratton, two thought leaders, academics, and authors. I'm going to hand you over to Jeremy, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jo. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many people from all over the world. Can I add my own warm welcome on behalf of the Royal College of Art? And while it's wonderful to see everybody, it's even more wonderful to introduce my special guest, Linda Gratton, Professor of Management Practice at the London Business School, and one of the world's foremost thinkers on the future of work. Now, Linda and I have been circling each other professionally for many years. We're comrades in arms, and we're both fascinated by what we see currently as the biggest change in working practice for a generation. Let me tell you a little bit about Linda. Not just a leading academic with a rock star reputation in her field, not just a consultant who advises everyone from global companies to the Japanese government on business and workplace strategy, but also the best-selling author of 11 books, including 100-Year Life, which is all about our aging population, and her latest book, Redesigning Work, which of course is the title of this session. Linda, welcome.
Oh, Jeremy, thank you so much. And I feel just as thrilled to be with you. As you were saying, Jeremy and I, for hi audience, have been talking to each other for years and years. I love the Royal College of Art. I'm so proud to be associated with it. I'm so proud to be associated with Jeremy. I know this is going to be an amazing hour. I've got my pen. We're going to learn a lot.
Yes, this is not about broadcasting ideas to you. This is about sharing ideas and building ideas with such an amazing group who are logged onto in session today. Yeah. So Linda, let me start by asking you about your new book. Why do you think work needs to be redesigned, and why now?
Well, I felt that work needs to be redesigned for ages. And let me I study the future of work. That the program I teach at the London Business School to our dear MBA students, maybe we've got some high MBA students, is about the future of work. And I talk about three trends that are really shaping the way we think about work. The first is demographics. We're going to live to 100, many of us, hopefully. And when you live to 100, unless you save a lot, and none of us are doing that, you're going to be working like me and Jeremy into your 70s. And that means you have to find a different way of working. Secondly, technological trends, to keep up with them, we have to really be upskilling and reskilling all the time. And thirdly, societal trends. You know, when I grew up in a family where my dad had a career and my mother was a carer. That would be a normal thing for a 1950s family. But now many of my colleagues, my younger colleagues, are working full-time and are bringing up kids. So they've got dual careers. So they want a lot more flexibility. So the answer to the question, Jeremy, is I've been saying for ages that work needs to be redesigned, but honestly, there was no audience for that. You know, my MBA students listened to it, but, you know, they weren't the people who were necessarily going to change. What made it now was the pandemic. 23rd of March, 2020, we suddenly, everything changed. And I kept a diary. Here it is. It's volume 14 of everything I heard. And I spoke to people all over the world. And I realized that if anything was going to change in work, it was going to be now. And so I wrote a Harvard Business Review article that was the front cover. It's a show and tell.
Hey.
There it is.
Hybrid, right.
I'm so proud of that.
Yeah.
It's actually, for those of you who are designers, don't you love that? That's the front. I love it. And then that was why I was then, Penguin said, could you write a book really quickly? And so I devoted last summer to writing, and it came out.
So demographics, new technology, and changing social attitudes. All collided with the pandemic. I mean, what I really liked about the book, and I know you began life as a psychologist, and I know you work for British Airways. And in the introduction to the book, you quote one of my favorite psychologists, Kurt Lewin, the man who famously said, "There's nothing so practical as a good theory." And you quoted his model of companies being frozen and then unfreezing and then refreezing. Do you think companies are sufficiently unfrozen? Tell us about that process.
Well, actually, funny enough, I went back to read Kurt Lewin yesterday, because there's something about that. And of course, when you go back, people say, well, actually, he didn't say that at all, but that's okay. It's still a good theory. He said something like it. But what he was trying to show is that, you know, there are times when things change, and he called that the unfreeze. And in general, those of you who run companies or in companies know that companies unfreeze generally because of something that happens to them. You know, for example, there's a new design that comes out from a competitor, so God, they have to suddenly do something about it. Or you have massive inflation. Oh, I think that reminds us of something, Jeremy. So you're having to think, wow, what are we going to do about our pension? So usually it's an exogenous shock, but and only one company experiences it, or a company in an ecosystem. What's really interesting about this is it hit everybody that day. And I think that that's why the unfreeze was very significant. In the HBR article, the company I chose to lead with was Fujitsu. And the reason I did this, and Jeremy, you know Japan as well as I do, is that if that was the most frozen of any sort of organizational structure we'd seen, I mean, it just wasn't ever going to change. And yet suddenly, within a day, everybody started working from home. So we did unfreeze, but we're now in the period of refreeze. And actually, to be honest with you, Jeremy, I'd hope not to have to talk about hybrid again. But actually, even I have come back. You'll see posted a thing I wrote in the Times yesterday, sadly behind a paywall. But really what I was arguing there is that there is now a battle on for hybrid. And so we're really only partway through the refreeze. And one of the things I said in that article is, we just have to realize that there's a lot of stakeholders around here, you being one. I mean, you know, the RCA and the way you think about offices, and that wonderful book of yours, Jeremy, which everybody should read. I wanted to have a copy of it here. And Jeremy,
I just have one on my desk.
Oh, good. It's a wonderful book, by the way.
Working. It is about unfreezing. It is. I just realized now it is about unfreezing.
It is. Yeah, I learned a lot from it.
The assumptions of work.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stakeholders around, and those of you who are interested in systems thinking and design thinking, and I know as our RCA people you do, then that's how I'd like to interpret what we're seeing now. There's a lot of stakeholders with different views. You know, leaders are saying one thing, employees are saying another, designers are saying one thing, customers are. So it's a complex stakeholder. But what makes it even more complex is there isn't even any agreement within the stakeholder group. So right now, and Jeremy, you know this, there are people leaders who are saying, I want you all back in the office. And there are leaders who are saying you can stay at home. And actually, I spoke to somebody last week and they said, it's taking up too much of our leadership time. You know, we're spending the conflict about what's happening now is very time consuming. So that's where we are now. I think it's a battle. I think there is conflict. I would like to see change. And I'm really determined, as much as I can do, which is obviously very little, to say, let's not freeze too quickly. Let's carry on in this very uncomfortable liminal time of being unfrozen.
That's very, very interesting. Let's go immediately to our participants on this webinar. Jo, could we have the first poll?
Sure.
So I'm asking the question here is what your views on hybrid working. So hybrid working, is it a permanent and decisive shift in how we will work? Is it a temporary trend before we return to the office full time, so everything goes back to a pre-pandemic normal? Or is it a confused and ambiguous phase in which we're not quite sure, we're watching, we're waiting, there's going to be a prolonged phase of kind of constructive indecision? So if you could just vote for one of those, Linda and I can't vote, but Linda, if you had to vote for one of the three, what do you think it is?
I'm not, you see, Jeremy, here's the difference between you and me. I'm a psychologist trained in this sort of methodology. So I am not allowed to influence anyone, because this is a proper experimental. So no, you and I can't say a thing. We can't even vaguely say. I'm just very interested to hear what the audience have to say, because, you know, it could be actually any of those three, couldn't it? It could be a permanent and decisive shift. It could be temporary, or it could be confused and ambiguous. And the temporary, by the way, is before we return to the office full time. So I've got my pen at the ready. I'm so interested to hear what our 500 or 300 people on the poll are saying. So
okay.
I'm not going to ask you either, Jeremy. I don't want to hear.
I'm not going to say.
Good. We don't want to influence the experimental procedure.
No, I'm glad I'm working with a trained psychologist.
Yeah, well.
Okay. Jo, could we have the poll results, please? Oh, wow. Okay.
So 69% are saying it's permanent.
69% are saying permanent shift. No, very few people going back. But nearly 30% saying it's a watch and wait phase.
Wow, that surprises me. And it might be a bit to do with the audience we have here. We're going to ask, I have another audience later on, and we might ask the same question. I think there's a real possibility that we'll be back to the office full time. I think.
Tell me before we'll get on to the problems that companies are having and the tremendous problems that hybrid workers are having. But before we get to that, just give us a flavor of the model in the book. What's the theory at the heart of the book?
Well,
4-stage processes.
Yeah, well, actually, the reason I'm really happy to be talking to the RCA today is that you, I think, as designers, have a view about process that quite a lot of people in organizations don't have. You see process as something that's, you know, that's a systems. I've always been very influenced by systems thinking. Well, there's another thing to say about that, but we'll leave it for a moment. And so when I saw what was happening with hybrid, and this was, I wrote the book came out when over the summer, but of course I wrote it almost a year before. So I had to write the book really quickly before I really saw what was playing out. And so, you know, it's part of the reason I've kept on writing since the book is that things are playing out even more. But what I said, it was a systems approach. And basically what it said is, look, you've got to do 4 things. None of this is going to surprise you. The first is you've got to understand what's happening. And then you've got to start, you know, modeling what could be. And then you've got to sort of experiment around it. And then you've got to embed. So those 4 phases were part of what the book was about. I think there was a few points that I made that were significant. The first was that when it comes to understanding what I'd predicted and what has indeed happened is that people are mostly understanding what their employees want. What they're not looking at, although I thought they should, was understanding what the job's about and understanding what networks are about. So the understanding bit had three aspects to it: understanding individuals and their preferences and their life stages, understanding the job. For example, my job is very different from your jobs and lots of other people's jobs. And the third is understanding networks and relationships. So that was one thing I thought that was interesting. The second part of that 4-stage model I thought was interesting was the end bit, which was to do with how do you make things work. And I identified 3 stakeholder groups. One is the employees themselves, one is the managers, and one is the leaders. And what I said is, you know, leaders have to have some clarity about what the purpose of the organization is and what they believe. And managers are going to be the conduit. And I was worried at that stage that managers weren't going to be able to manage hybrid. And that's why the second HBR article that I wrote, and it would be great to have that one up as well if we can, is which I wrote with Diana Gerson, who's a friend of mine who just stepped down from the board of IBM, was something like, I don't remember the title, the final title, it was something like managers can't do it all. And very early on, we said, look, you know, managers are this golden thread that actually manages hybrid, and they don't have time to do it. They can't do it. You know, it's really hard. We've got to give them more. Thank you for that. Oh, no, it's not that one. No, I don't think it's that one, Hattie. It's one called something. It's the one with Diana Gerson anyway. Sorry, I should have given you prior notice of this, Hattie. Sorry. So I sort of set it out as a process that companies should go through. Did they do it, Jeremy? No, they didn't, which makes me sort of sad, really, and wondering what.
I think it segues nicely into the second thing that I want to talk about. There's the theory and the model, which read the book, it's fantastic. But then there's the practice on the ground. And I just want to go to our second poll. Joe, if we could have the second poll. So I want to get a flavor from this group as to what's happening in your own organization. It might be an educational institution, it might be an employer, it might be a design studio, but what's going on in your organization? You've got 3 choices: mandating everyone back to the office, giving individuals more choice in how they work. This is, now you've got a choice and you've had autonomy during the pandemic, that it's a kind of anywhere, anytime work practice, or there's no clear picture. Companies are chopping and changing their policies as events dictate. Those of us who watch the tech industry will know that Apple mandated people back on certain days, then changed their mind, then retreated, then came forward with a new proposal, then retreated. So there's a lot of chopping and changing going on. So if you could vote, and we'll have a look at the results. But I think, Linda, it's fair to say that the journey to hybrid has not gone according to plan. All over the world, millions of workers have been mandated back, but they're just not doing it. I saw some data last week for central business districts in the major Australian cities. And the distance between peak occupancy of these business districts and low occupancy was huge. Huge variations. Monday and Friday, they're ghost towns. And that has all kinds of knock-on problems.
I mean, interestingly, I'm trying to construct something probably for Harvard Business Review at the moment, and what I'm trying to do in the construction of this piece is to acknowledge the different stakeholders, and of course one of the stakeholders is architects and designers who are saying, well, actually, if I talk to my friends at Arup, for example, they'll say offices are great. I mean, Foster's, I talked to my friends at Foster's. offices are great, let's have everybody back in them. They can be wonderful, they can be creative, look at what we did with Steve Jobs, in that weird Apple thing that they've got in California. And, it's actually a really positive portrayal of what an office is. But the alternative to that, which is really the really strong data that psychologists are coming out with about open plan offices, which is honestly where an office gets to. They don't look like a gorgeous Apple, thing. They look like an open plan, is that these really reduce productivity. So I think there's also quite a lot of, not confusion, but there's no point in saying, let's get back to the office because the office is such an amazing place. For most people, the office was never an amazing place. However much you designers and architects wanted it to be, it was an open plan where you couldn't hear yourself, you couldn't get any focus, you were interrupted all the time. But it'd be interesting to see what comes out with this poll number 2, wouldn't it?
Okay, Joe, let's see the result. Okay, well, that is very encouraging. That's very encouraging. And maybe we're a slightly skewed sample in that a lot of creative people who are probably working for very enlightened organizations, but 70% are saying that they're getting more choice in how and where they work.
That's great. It might be to do. It might be to do with the sort of people and work you're doing, but and that's great. And I feel that when you go back to the Industrial Revolution, and Jeremy, you and I are old, but even you and I weren't actually around in the Industrial Revolution. But if you were to go back to the Industrial Revolution, the factories and the idea that you came into a factory every day and sat with each other on an assembly line really was the beginnings of how work got done, wasn't it? And we haven't really got away from that. The idea that work is something you go to for a day and you sit there and then you come out of it. And I think it's great that we're getting more flexibility, but to really make that work, there are some big challenges that we have to confront.
Absolutely. We're getting some great questions, by the way, coming in over the Q&A. I'm going to go to one because the result of our poll showed that 70% of you are getting more freedom. One thing we've discovered in the WorkTech Academy network and also through our Royal College of Art research is that some companies are finding hybrids so difficult to do that they're going completely remote. They're going to a complete remote distributed way of doing things. There's a company called Yelp, was in the news recently. The CEO, Jeremy Stoppelman, said that hybrid was the worst of all worlds, and worst of both worlds. And it's interesting. There's a question here from Win Burke, who says Mark Andreessen and Airbnb and et al. Are making big bets on remote and distributed systems. Why do you think they're wrong? Did we say we thought they were wrong? I'm not sure. Maybe you did, Linda.
I didn't say they were wrong. No. I mean, what I would say, and in the book, I also talked about a company which is entirely virtual, which is called Artemis, which is created. It's on the west coast of the US, and it's created primarily from BCG and McKinsey alumni, and it's entirely virtual. And I spoke to the CEO, and in fact, I now, I'm quite close to them, about how you make that work. And I think you can make virtual work. So I'm pretty agnostic actually about what organizations do. I haven't even really been tough about the investment banks or BlackRock that have said we want everybody back. Some people have been very tough on Larry Fink about that. I never have, because it seems to me that the role of a CEO is to do what they think is best for the company. And if that's what they think is best, then there are implications to that, which they have to understand. So, for example, if you pull everybody back, there's a bunch of people who you will lose because they don't want to come back, and there are alternative options available to you. But if you're Goldman, you say, that's fine. I mean, there's plenty of people who want to work for Goldman. We just have to pay you more. So, what I think is really important is the deal. And what I feel is that organizations should be clear about what the deal is, and then you can decide whether you like the deal or not. And quite a lot of people say, I don't like the deal, Larry. And Larry says, fine, there's plenty of people who do.
I mean, I think that the thing about hybrid is that there are companies that are hyper hybrid and companies that are hardly hybrid. So the big US investment banks are hardly hybrid at all. They're everyone back to the office, and we've been calling them in my book I call them resolute returners, and they are different from the choice champions who are at the other end of the spectrum. What's interesting is that a lot of older people who really want, there's a demographic difference, I think, between employees who are early in their career and they want social interaction, they want to go to an office to build a professional network, and older workers who are enjoying not commuting, they've probably got a better property to work from home. But actually what's happening is that there are the big law firms and the big banks are mandating people back to the office, and they're the older people, whereas the social media and software companies staffed by younger people are saying everybody go remote. So the wrong demographics are in the wrong place.
Oh, you see, I'm going to have to kick back on that, Jeremy. I just think that's so stereotypical. You see, remember, I also wrote The 100-Year Life. That's a really stereotypical view of age. And actually, it turns out that quite a lot of young people want to be in the office because they want to mix with each other. And quite a lot of older people want to, I mean, I don't think it's an age thing, honestly. And if anyone's got data to show that, please put it in the chat, because I'm really interested to hear that, because I'm going to push back on two things, Jeremy. We should have a glass of wine at this stage, don't we? One is that, it's the elder people who want everybody back, and it's you young creatives who want us, be flexible. I think it's to do more with the individual. And the second thing is that being back in the office full time is a bad thing. I don't think it necessarily is, but there are some real challenges. And I think that, I thought that our friend Kristen here, O'Sullivan, made a really important point, which is, and this is why hybrid can be so difficult. She's saying, look, I'm coming into the office, traveling 3 hours a day, paying $6,000 for my ticket, and there's work from home people who are not doing that. That's not fair. And I do think this question of fairness is really, really tricky. I don't know, by the way, Kirsten, what the resolution to that is, but I think you're not the only person that's raising that question. The other group, I know that there probably aren't many people here in manufacturing on today, but there's a whole other group. Let's say you're running Mars, the confectionery company, and half your people in factories and half of them are in offices. The factory workers are coming in every day and the office workers aren't. Is that fair? So, there are fundamental issues here that we have to address, some of which are about fairness. Others of them are just about, the design of work, really. And, again, one of your other people made a great comment. It was a bit further back.
Yeah,
just really
great stuff on the chat, everyone.
Yeah, chat's great. David Prunell's point, which is that, why can't people learn to work asynchronously? Why do you have to be together all the time? And he's making a really important point, because what we've found is that synchronous virtual, i.e. what we're doing now, the Microsoft data shows that that's gone up, that's doubled. So we're spending far too much time, as David has said, on Zooms, which is synchronous virtual. And why are we doing that? And I think David's absolutely right that we've got to learn. The interesting thing about being in an office all the time, Jeremy, is that you don't really have to learn how to work. You just show up and you just hang around and do stuff. Once you start having hybrid or working from home, you've actually got to actively design work. You've got to confront issues that David's raised, like, well, hang on, why are we having all these synchronous virtual meetings? And he's right. And also the issues that Kirsten has said, which is, it's not really fair. Why is it that this person is living in Scotland and I'm living in London and I'm going in every day and she's not? That's not fair. And so, you know, we're confronted with some really difficult choices and judgment calls.
I think that's right. And the issue of equality is incredibly important as well. And Claudia Dutson says, how can we bring in the acknowledgement of housing inequality? For many people, there is no space to work. Additionally, with energy costs, is it fair that employees pay the overheads for work? How can inequality of this sort be brought to the debate? I think that's incredibly important. There's talk now of companies getting more involved in and it's a very controversial issue. Do they start advising their employees on how to save energy at home? I know that Goldman Sachs started telling their employees to switch to a certain provider, you know, and it was greatly resented. So, but the issue of housing, some people cannot work from home; they don't have the space. And I think one of the things that I found during the pandemic was, you know, people said, oh, it's so democratic, everybody's a slate on the screen. True to a point, but some of us are sitting in home offices and others are sitting on their bed, you know, fighting with 5 other flatmates for the internet. So
one of my team was, in fact, I've had 2 Zooms, one with my own team member who was stuck in New York during COVID and actually did her whole work from a small cupboard. And I was talking to someone in the US you know, during COVID, she was interviewing me and I said, where are you? She said, I'm in a cupboard. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's significant issues about equity and unfairness. And as a psychologist, that really worries me because issues of equity and unfairness then go into issues of trust. Let me pose a question to you, Jeremy, and actually maybe to our audience as well. I was talking to a creative company last week on the phone. In fact, I'm spending some time with them on Thursday. And they said they have 2,000 people around the world, 600 of whom are in London. The CEO said to me, they've got 600 people in London, of whom 300 have not been in the office since the beginning of COVID.
Wow.
What does he do?
Well, I'll be interested in people.
I'm only asking. I'd be interested to hear what people say, because I don't know. Because you see, the thing is, now here's the point. So if you mandate people to come in, what happens if they don't come in? Do you go and drag them in? Do you dock their salary? Do you put their name up somewhere? I mean, do you see where we're going with this?
Yes. Well, mandating hasn't worked, and most people admit that it hasn't worked. Then they've tried to bribe people with free pizza and the coffee cart and socials and happy hours and all of that kind of thing. And that's kind of, it gave a short-term boost, but that's now run its course. Now companies are kind of threatening, the mandators are threatening. I think what your CEO has got to do is to say, well, you know, maybe we have half the space and twice the experience, which is the phrase of the moment, is that offices have got to be redesigned, which is good news for the RCA community.
Yeah.
To redevelop offices and make it worthwhile to come in. It's not just to come and be socializing and collaborating with other people. That's part of it. People also want to come to the office for some privacy and to be able to conduct digital work. So they need enclosure and that, you know, they need private spaces, cubicles, that kind of thing. But we've got to make the office a better experience. I think in the book, in your book, I was very struck. You were talking about, there was a word board with Fujitsu where you asked employees what they really wanted to see if they were going to go back into the office. And it wasn't rows of desks, you know, there was things like dog friendly, close to home, good acoustics. And it was all about making it much more empathic to their own kind of lifestyle. So I thought close to home was interesting, because how many people travel hours and hours to go to a central office, which suits the employer, but it doesn't necessarily suit the employee. So maybe you say to your CEO, satellite offices, a different vibe, a different experience, something much more suited to how people want to work in the future.
I agree. And one of the companies we talked about was Fujitsu, because Tokyo, you know, as those of you who know, Tokyo is a very particular issue because it's a big commute. It's very expensive to live there. And actually the government is trying very hard to get people out. They're trying to level up, as we are doing in so many other countries. And what Fujitsu said is we're going to have 3 types of offices. One is an office really near your home where you can just go in to get some privacy. And it'll just be for any Fujitsu person. It could be a WeWork, it could be an Airbnb, I don't know what it is, but it's something that you get to, which you just have to walk 10 minutes to. There's another one, which is more of a collaborative space, and that, by the way, the first one's got a printer in it, because as you know, the thing that's driving everybody insane working from home is printers. At least it is. We almost have a house full of printers now. My husband and I, we must have 7 printers, because each time they break, we just buy another. I think we probably need. So the second type is where you actually meet collaboratively. So it's got really good internet and it's got some of the collaborative tools in it. And then the third is more of a Tokyo-based office, which has got the sort of stuff you'll see in Arup, or you'll see in any of the gorgeous architectural practices I've been looking at recently, where they're fabulous and they've got all sorts of things. But actually, the truth is that for most people now, when they're coming back to work, they're coming back to an open office. That's what they're coming back to. That's the reality of people's lives. And that open office has often got, you know, just rows and rows and rows of desks. And architects are responsible for that, by the way. It was you who designed these damn things.
Well, architects, you know, work to a brief. And if you really want to see the future of the campus, the office campus in the hybrid age, I recommend the brand new Lego campus at Billund, in Denmark. They have completely revamped what they were going to do. A third of the space is collaborative, a third of the space is desks focus, but a third of the space is just for socializing. There's a people hall where you can do all manner of sports and entertainment, and it's very, very, very popular. But I'm going to take us to, we've talked quite a bit about hybrid working and why the gears are grinding. I'd like, Joe, can we have our third poll?
Sure.
And it's about concerns around hybrid working. So you've got 3 options again. So what is your chief concern about hybrid working? You may have no concerns about hybrid working, but is it overwork and burnout due to always on demands? The data, especially from Microsoft 365, is telling us that we're spending more and more of our evenings in online calls. Is it missing out on social interaction with colleagues, missing the face-to-face, or is it being overlooked for career advancement and training?
These are great questions, Jeremy, aren't they? Because they come to the heart of this. You know, I wished that today you and I had, you know, the 5 things we want companies to do, and we may get to that at some stage. But I do think we're in a very complex moment, actually. You talked earlier about Lego, but the truth is most offices don't look even remotely like Lego. And because it takes 10 years to build an office, you're not going to be able to suddenly change a banking floor into a Lego floor. So I
digital work in industrial era offices, you know, Taylorism from the factory floor.
Taylorism.
Let's see our results.
Yeah, let's see our results. Helga said it's all 3. I know, but you got to choose.
Right.
Okay, so it is all 3. That's interesting, isn't it?
That's interesting.
It is all 3. Helga, you're right. So,
but the missing out on social interaction with colleagues is in the lead, and that doesn't surprise me at all, because I think it's that kind of it's the buzz, it's the animation that you get in a workplace. that's important. But the others are also also very important.
Can I ask you a question, Jeremy, about that? And I'd love to ask, everybody on today. So one of the things that we're really, I think where we're going to go with hybrid, to be honest, is some combination of being in the office and being at home. That's what it's going to be. And it'll be 3 days in the office, some combination. But then that comes to exactly the point you made earlier, which is Monday and Friday, the office is empty. Mm. And that's a problem for anyone who's trying to run something, that you've got this huge estate that's empty for, almost half the time. How is that going to play out?
Well, I don't think companies can have very expensive real estate, whether they're government, whether they're private corporations, whether they're NGOs, everybody's faced, whether they're housing associations with their offices. It doesn't matter what line of work you're in. You can't pay for something for 7 days a week and have it utilized for maybe less than 3. So there's going to be new real estate models. I mean, the flexible space market where you can rent very, very simply without expensive, complicated leases for short periods of time. I think that the whole flexible office market, forget WeWork and all the troubles it's had. There are a lot of other operators who will be successful.
Yeah.
New real estate models will treat real estate will lease real estate in the way that we lease cars or photocopiers, or we won't own them in quite the same way or have such restricted leases.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think companies will also they will also move to, I come back to my point about twice the experience, half the space. They will make there's a move at the moment to more sustainable offices, to higher quality offices. I think what's going to suffer is what you have dotted around most cities in the world, is crappy, subprime, second class, rather faded 80s and 60s office buildings. They're the ones that there's going to be a collapse in value. People will be a flight. There'll be a flight to quality. To answer your questions, I just want to. There was a question which I saw earlier. Ina McHugh. How should those of us in education truly help people to prepare for the future of work? That's an interesting question, Linda.
Well, that's the question that, so I run at London Business School and have done for years, actually, long before it was fashionable, a program on the future of work. And the way that I prepare my students is that I take them from the world. So I start by looking at what are the trends that are shaping our world. And actually, we talked about 3 earlier, demographic trends, technological trends, social trends. I also look at carbon, which I haven't spoken about, but that's the 4th trend that we look at. And that takes up, quite a bit of the whole lecture series. And then we talk about, well, how is that going to play out? And that's honestly a moving feast. And you can see this is why today is such an interesting conversation, because everybody's talking about it. And thanks a lot, Wynne, to the Derek Thompson in The Atlantic. The Atlantic's done great work actually on this. If anyone's interested, The Atlantic is one of the go-to places on this issue. And then I start then looking at the individual and saying, well, how are you going to prepare? Which is really the book I'm writing at the moment, which is to say, how, and that links into one of my books called The New Long Life, which is to say, how do you prepare for a long life when so much around you is changing? So I think for me, it's about understanding the trends that are shaping the world and being aware of them, and then preparing yourself in terms of, your intangible assets, your productivity, your vitality, your transformational assets to be ready yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very interesting subject of how you prepare people for it.
Yeah.
I mean, for College of Art, we are a face-to-face community. People come to the college to work in the studios and interact with peers and colleagues. And I think the pandemic was a profound and awful shock that the studios and the studios were shut and the studio culture was cancelled. It was shut down, and you know, it's a tough one. Other institutions already had a lot of MOOCs. They were able to get, you know, they got online. The RCA got online very quickly, but it was climbing a very steep wall because it was such a face-to-face culture.
Yeah.
A very interesting question from Zafia, Zafia A, and she said, how do you see the shift in the psychological contract in the age of hybrid working? So this psychological contract between employer and employee, which you've studied a lot, Linda.
Yeah.
Do you think it is shifting? It must shift, mustn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just intrigued by the point that Wynn's now said about Derek Thompson, which looks really interesting, actually. You must bring the familiar with you. And you must make the end stage intriguing. Yeah, it is pretty intriguing what the end state will be, Wynn. So the psychological contract has been up for grabs for ages, actually, as you know, Jeremy. So, you know, it would have been parent-child, you know, the organization's the parent, the employee's the child. I'm here to tell you what to do, to nurture you, to support you. And your job is to do what I ask you to do. When it moved to adult, and I actually wrote a book called The Democratic Enterprise, which I can honestly say only my mother read. There is somebody, I've met a few people who said, no, I read The Democratic Enterprise. But it was really about that. And what it showed is that when you move to adult, which is where the psychological contract went, it didn't just affect organizations, because they were now saying, okay, so you now need to make more of choices of your own, but the individual had to have more personal agency. And it's a word, this notion of, I'm going to write it down here, this notion of personal agency is a really important question, you know, that you are somehow able to be the agent of your own destiny. And that requires, you know, that's quite a lot. That's a big ask for lots of people, to be the agent of their destiny. Can I come back, Jeremy, to a point you made earlier about the studio culture? Yeah. You know, when people say it's great to be in the office, that's really what they're talking about, aren't they? They're saying, and it's interesting that even people who don't have jobs that have a creative title are saying, I like to get into the office because I can talk to people, I can interact with people. And I think one of the points I made in the book, Redesigning Work, is the reason we should start talking about the job itself is there are some jobs for whom the studio culture is really important. And there's other jobs like mine, which are really focused jobs, where being on your own and focusing is also really important. So actually getting a sense of what the job is and how the different parts of it, you know, play out, that's going to be really important. Yeah,
I think so. It kind of echoes something that Nicholas has said on the Q&A. What has been demonstrated during COVID is significant impact hybrid or home working had on how people are connected to one another. That's crucial to mental health of individuals, but also to the distinctive culture of the company. Informal networks as the human glue. It's rather nice. Informal networks operate as a human glue to any company. We need them. How can we nurture them if we carry on with hybrid models? So again, I'm sensing some pushback against the rather binary nature. There's another comment about the binary nature of hybrid working as well. But it's not just home and work.
Well, that's why in the model that I presented in the HBR article, I use the word place, not the word office. And I can see a number of you have said, well, it's all to do with place. Hybrid has just become the word. I actually didn't even like it as a word. And I agree with many of you. It's just far too binary. It's much more complex than that. But can I come back to the point, Jeremy, that you've just made about connectivity? The pieces that I'm writing at the moment, and I wrote a piece in the Financial Times last month, and I did a podcast on the Financial Times about friendship. And it's really about the nature of friendships and the nature of having a friend at work. You know, part of the reason we go into the office or we go to a place is that we meet our friends. And we know from a whole bunch of surveys that people are more likely to stay in at work and feel good about it because they have a friend at work. So I'd like to bring that into the mix as well for the conversation today, because an office is a place of creativity and it's a place of collaboration, but it's also a place of friendship.
Yeah.
That's not to say you can't make friends, virtually. And I mentioned earlier, Diana Gerson and I, who wrote this Harvard Business Review article together, she's based in California, and we never met during the whole of this quite creative process. We have met subsequently, but we didn't meet each other at all. We did all of it on Zoom. Did she become a friend? Well, she did once I met her face to face, but it's friendships quite a lot about trust and openness, and that's quite hard on Zoom. Yeah.
You're not getting all the information, and it has an interesting mirror in the discussion about Facebook friends, doesn't it? And networks and people spending all their time online. We're on the last leg of this webinar. It's been a whirlwind kind of tour of ideas and comments and thoughts. I do want to address one of the big issues for the Royal College of Art community is where's the opportunity for innovation in all of this? Where are the opportunities for innovation? I'm going to go to our fourth poll and ask people where where, having heard some of this and having read and some of the questions and comments, where's this around the future of work? What's the most significant innovation? Where will it be? Will it be in redesigning organizations to improve leadership? Will it be in redesigning office space to support well-being, both mental and physical? Or will it be redesigning technology to improve connectivity, maybe creating more digital equality between those who are in the office and those who are not in the office, for example? So if you choose one of those, we'd probably want to redesign all three, but what would be your priority?
Oh, I love this. It's a great question, isn't it, Jeremy? And I'm so excited to do the crit.
Enough now not to ask you.
No, don't ask me. But I can say I'm so excited about being on your crit team for the program that you run about innovating.
There's a lovely comment from Linda Hausmanis, who said, you can see how leaders will find this too challenging. It's easier to mandate people back to the office.
Yeah, well, that's my worry. That's my worry, Linda. That's why, what I'm trying to do at the moment is to write something for leaders that say these are the 5 things you have to do. But it's just so complex, and it would be such a shame. And by the way, I do think that the amount of time we've got now to sort this out is getting smaller and smaller, because as you say, Jeremy, people are now mandating, and then there'll be a fight. Once you get mandates, there'll be a fight. And so the human resource people are already polishing off their industrial relations certificates, because I mean, it could be tough.
Let's have the results of poll number 4. Okay, so that's pretty
really interesting.
Leadership is in the lead.
Yes. Now, isn't that interesting? So can I ask the community, those of you who said redesigning organizations to improve leadership, could you tell me in the chat what you meant by that? What aspects of leadership would you like to see improve? Because that poll result surprises me. And that means that you've got something in your head, which I would love to hear more about. So if you gave that as your most significant innovation, could you just briefly put it in the chat and say, what is it about leadership that you wanted redesigned? Let's start perhaps with you, Jeremy. Oh, here it is. Purpose. Okay. So you want leaders to be more purposeful. What would you say about this, Jeremy?
I think leaders have got to be able to lead over distance and lead asynchronous as well as synchronous work. I think most performance management and leadership models have been based around people being in the office.
Yeah.
Simply leadership without walls would be helpful, and
Yeah.
leadership that kind of listened more and broadcast less. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of work going on around compassionate and listening leadership, but there's also a lot of material out there which shows that middle management has been decimated with the Great Resignation, and people feel very, very burnt out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's a very, very interesting result.
Me too.
Just pick up on one or two other. Simon Jordan, I think that's Simon Jordan from Jump Studios, said, "Are we framing the issue correctly with the use of language?"
Yeah.
Work suggesting this binary context of home versus office, whereas perhaps the issue is coming from the idea for knowledge workers we can work from anywhere, and the city itself, in all its infrastructures and capacities, is the workplace. I think that's a very interesting.
Yeah, I do.
I just wanted to drop it in, because hybrid isn't just changing the organization or the work pattern. It's actually changing how we use cities.
It is. It is.
For us. I don't know whether you wanted to comment on that, the urban scale of this.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's interesting. Part of what I've been doing is to talk to the mayors of cities. The World Economic Forum has a group of mayors that they work with, but also there's Tortoise, you know, that really nice, I don't know how many of you are members of Tortoise. It's one of the sort of press processes. They've had a fantastic series talking to mayors about what do you think a city should look like. It's definitely, you know, it's a really important conversation to have. And you're right, as a number of you said, you know, why do we keep talking about places if it can only be an office? One of the companies I talked about in the book, which is actually, oddly enough, a finance company, said to people, you can live anywhere you want for 3 months a year. Now, that's got a big tax issue, and I won't go into it, but they have held with that. And that really links to what the CEO of Airbnb wants to do, which is to have all of you not working from your home, but working from one of his Airbnb places.
That's very, it's, I'm just kind of, there's so many comments and so many good thoughts. Simon has left Jump Studios, he tells me. But there's so many interesting questions that we haven't really got time. Maybe we'll answer some offline and share some thoughts. Anne Boddington talks about implications for inland revenue and welfare system. Our financial systems are not keeping pace with the scale of this revolution, and revolution it is. I think that in this webinar, we have talked about redesigning work, using the word redesign in its broadest sense. And this affects people, it affects place, especially cities, and it affects technology, especially how organizations deploy it. And it plays right to the heart of what a number of participants have described as this psychological contract. And we've had a psychologist, a world-leading psychologist, kind of lead us into the maze. I'm not sure we've led people out of the maze, Linda, but
I'm okay about that.
I'm okay about that.
Let's stay in the maze.
It got complex, it got a bit messy, but if you do want some clarity, do have a look at Redesigning Work, because it's got a great story to it. It's got a great model in it. Do have a look at Unworking. If you want to dig deeper into all of this, and in developing creative strategies for the future of work, we have a 4-day program for you at the Royal College of Art. It's running over 4 half days on the 3rd, 4th, 7th, and 8th.
There it is.
Joe will put it in the link. Delegates will be joining creative teams on future of work projects that will supervise of their own choosing. It'll be a rapid design sprint. And Linda is going to join the panel to review the projects. And as I say in the blurb, this masterclass will change your perspective and help you bring fresh ideas to future strategy. So can I say a huge thank you to Linda, a huge thank you to all of you for commenting, voting in the polls, asking questions. It's a complex landscape we're in, but we have the Royal College of Art community and all our network, we have the ingenuity to find our way through it. Linda, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And by the way, I'm writing about this all the time. I wish I wasn't, but I am. So do go to my website or else join me on LinkedIn and you'll see I'm writing almost every day at the moment.
Thank you very much.
It's so complex.
Yeah.
And also from my side, I would like to thank everyone who joined us for today's in-session talk. Jeremy and Linda, thank you so, so much for sharing your insights and expertise. For our audience today, if you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with the executive education team and or the speakers, you can either reach out directly using the contact information on our slide. You can reach out directly on short courses. And make sure to check our webpage for upcoming in-session talks. And as Jeremy said, I also put the link to our upcoming course in November, led by Jeremy with Linda as our guest, Creative Studies for the Future of Work. Thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.